This episode of the Ottawa Entrepreneurs Podcast is brought to you by Extension Marketing, the marketing agency that specializes in unique needs and budgets of small to medium-sized businesses. They provide turnkey marketing solutions that get results. You can find out more today at extensionmarketing.com. Now here's your host, Pat Whalen.
Thanks, David, for taking the time today to come on the show. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, Pat. It's good to chat with you again.
David, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, please, and the business that you currently run?
Yep, sure. So I, as my accent will infer, I came over from the UK quite a long time ago, about 30-something years ago. I joined a company called Learning Tree International, which is a computer training company. And I joined as a salesperson and had quite a swift ascent in the company. After a couple of years, I was president of the Canadian business. I ran the Canadian business for about 10 years and then became the chief operating officer for the global organization. So I had responsibilities in various countries, Japan, US, UK, etc. That gave me a wonderful opportunity to experience not only cultures, business cultures around the world, but also the company was made up of a series of subsidiaries of different sizes, ranging from the smallest operation was about $2 million, and the largest operation was just over $100 million. So the combination, it was around about a $200 million business, which gave me, as I say, great insight into supporting the leadership in different sized companies and, as I said, across the globe. I did that for in total, about nearly 20 years before I moved on to a local consulting firm, which I think you know, Pat, Stratford Managers, run by Jim Roach, local entrepreneur and very successful businessman. I worked with Jim and the team there for about 5 years as the COO of Stratford Managers. That gave me a great deal of insight into the local business sector, having worked globally for much of my career. So for about 5 years, I worked with Jim and the team at Stratford, helping companies scale up and accelerate their business. And we typically worked with companies between, say, $5 and $150 million in revenue. Then for the last 5 or so years, I've been a consultant myself. I started out thinking as a COO, fairly broad business attributes. What should I focus on? And then I got a call from a local company asking me to build a program to help onboard executives, which was an interesting one to me because I'd onboarding many executives in my career, but I'd not followed a particular process. So I built a process and launched it and delivered it. And I've been doing that for the last 5 years. And I think the programs that I've created have supported over 100, probably over 200 now, leaders into their new roles. I've probably delivered a few dozen programs myself, and then recently wrote a book to give more insight to the process itself. So there's an overview for me for the last 30 years or so.
That's a really interesting journey, working for a large company, traveling over the world, and coming back, working for more of a mid-sized local company, and then eventually going out on your own. Does Learning Tree still exist, David?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yeah, it's based out of the US and it has Canadian operations. And yes, it still operates around the world.
Okay. And when you left Learning Tree, I mean, that's a big decision. You mentioned you were there for almost 20 years. Do you mind sharing with our listeners, what triggered that to want to go and work more locally?
Yeah, no, it wasn't a choice. I can tell you that. We had an ownership takeover and the entire C-suite was removed within the space of a year. And I would say it was a very challenging period for me because I feel sure that had that not occurred, I'd probably still be there, in my last years leading into retirement. So it was a great challenge for me. And indeed, it's something that I'm sure many people experience through their careers is moving from one position to another, whether through choice or not through choice, as it was in my case, reestablishing yourself and building confidence, because it can be a bit of a confidence knock, even for somebody who's had a lot of experience and I would say enjoyed a lot of success. We still question ourselves when things like that happen. So I was very fortunate to meet Jim Roach. He's a wonderful person and became a bit of a guide for me over the next 5 years. And so to answer your question, it wasn't choice. It's something that I think I adapted to reasonably well in hindsight.
But you make a really good point about no matter how experienced you are, when you get hit kind of sideways like that, no matter how much confidence you have or what your street cred is, it can be a blow, because this one thing, it really well, and now you have to look at, okay, what other options are there out there for me? So
yes.
When you started going out on your own, maybe take us through that process when you decided, I just want to do this on my own.
Yes, it's interesting because that period when I left Learning Tree, and I'll share with you personally as well, my wife had just been diagnosed with cancer. And so it was an extremely stressful time for my young family. And so I was in kind of two minds, maybe 3 or 4 different minds, what to do. Should I go back into the corporate world? Should I go on my own? Should I retire? There were different things in my mind, and I quickly ruled out retiring. But what I did is I wrote my first book, which was about leadership, 7 Steps to the Boardroom. And I was promoting a coaching program. And through that, that's how I met Stratford. So it wasn't a path that I could say that I deliberately plotted and said, this is what I want to do, this is how I'm going to get there. I just kind of moved forward doing what I could. And frankly, I didn't have many connections in Ottawa at the time. But by moving forward, creating a book or publishing a book, getting out there and meeting people, it opened up a few doors for me. And as I say, I landed in Stratford. And that kind of repeated itself when I left Stratford to go into the consulting world. Again, I wrote a book. I put my I guess, shingle out or whatever it is. I put my signpost up and started speaking to people. And once again, I was able to create some traction.
David, can you share with our listeners, more about your consultant practice? What does that look like? Types of people that you're trying to target, and what they can expect by working with you?
Yes. So as I say, originally I was looking to help companies grow. I mean, that's a bit of a big one, strategy or process orientation, profitization. And I worked with a number of companies, small companies. In fact, how I met you, Pat, through one of my consulting companies. I introduced them to you. One of my clients introduced them to you. And so for about 2 or 3 years, I was working with companies, maybe 2 or 3 companies at a time, to help them develop their revenue generation processes, partnerships, etc. And then, as I say, it kind of came to me, the onboarding process. And so once I created a leadership onboarding program, I started getting some interest from various places. And so now I've been onboarding executives for the best part of 5 years. And typically, companies come to me. They've heard about what I do, and so they reach out to me. And it's been anything from not-for-profit companies up to multi-billion-dollar organizations who are looking to integrate a new leader. And most companies don't actually have a structured onboarding program. They have an orienteering program that lasts for a week or 2. The program I created lasts for about 3 months. And I get very close with the incoming leader and with the company that's hiring them. So it's actually quite exciting for me because I get to learn about different types of businesses that I otherwise wouldn't have been involved in. So it's quite a dynamic experience. And again, I didn't plan it. It kind of came to me, and I'm quite happy that it's developed that way.
Do you do any work at all with people acquiring a company? Someone comes
I'm
in,
sorry.
someone comes in, buys a new business and in an industry they may not know. Do you provide that kind of service? Would you come in and help them with that?
I haven't done that, Pat, but I would say that, I mean, that is a potential area. The typical area that I work in, or the sectors that I work in, are generally quite well established companies who have maybe they have a shake up in the company, and so they're bringing in new leadership, or maybe it's just that they've had one leader leave. So I haven't actually done startup organizations or organizations that are looking to get into the marketplace. But again, the cross-section capabilities of onboarding fit all. So while I haven't done that sector, I'm sure that it would fit very well.
You talked about companies that are quite large. So are you ever working directly with the entrepreneur, or is it really that the companies are so large at that point that the entrepreneur's kind of gone and it's just the C-suite that's running things?
Good. That's a great question. No, it frequently is the entrepreneur. It frequently is. I'm working with typically the owner or owners of a company, and they're expanding, or as I say, they need to replace somebody. Oftentimes, I work with the CEO of a company who might not be the founder, but they are obviously the leader of the organization. And sometimes when I onboard CEOs, I'm working with the board. And so it is quite a senior level, but I would say more frequently than not, I'm working with the founders.
So you must have a lot of lessons that you can share with our listeners, having dealt with some. First of all, you run your own business, excuse me, but you're also coaching and consulting other founders. So let's dig into that a little bit, David.
Sure.
What pieces of advice would you give to someone that's listening right now that is currently working full time, but has this idea for business? Maybe they've had it for a long time, but they're just not quite ready to kind of, to take that leap. Is there anything you'd like to share with them?
Yes, there's a couple of things that jump to mind. And I have to say, when I left Learning Tree and started looking to run my own business, I did it the wrong way around. I actually did all the building of the product or the service, all the infrastructure, and get everything. It took me about a year to get ready to go. And really, I should have done it the other way. I should have gone to the marketplace first to find out exactly what it is that the market wanted from me. So I would suggest the first thing is to recognize the value that you bring. Be very critical of yourself, or very candid with yourself, because there's a lot of people with a lot of experience out there. And so unless you've got something that you can really brand to a very specific way, it is going to be very challenging. So I would suggest the first part is, whatever service or whatever product you're looking to take to market, do as much testing in the market as you can before you leave your current job and invest full time. So I guess what I'm saying there in summary is, test the market first for the service that you want to offer. There's a good chance you're going to have to tweak it versus what you think you're going to offer in the first place. The second thing I would say is, you have to be passionate about what you're offering, because, and by passion, I mean truly believe in the value that you bring to the marketplace, because it's not easy. I'd like to say it is, but it's not easy to start up a business, gain traction, and build the kind of acceleration that we all hope we have when we have a business idea. So you've got to stay passionate, otherwise you'll get knocked down very easily. So be prepared to take the long and winding road, as it were, unless you're lucky. If you're lucky and you hit a home run, good for you. But most people don't, unfortunately, regardless of how skillful and how much experience they have behind them. So test your product and stay positive.
David, I'd like to talk a little bit about the test your product or service idea. It comes up often on our show, and regular listeners will know how I feel about this, that I agree 100% with that concept. But I also think it's important to not test your product or service with family members,
Hmm.
because they in turn might, they're going to tell you what you want to hear.
Yes.
And you may think they're going to, pat you on the back, think it's a great idea when in fact it might not be. So I would suggest you test with actual potential customers that could actually write you a check. Would you agree with that?
I do agree. I would say that it's nice to have the support of your family and friends. And so, in those early months when you're building up whatever proposals or the pitch that you're going to give, it's nice to run it past your family and friends because they're going to give you positive encouragement. But I totally agree with you, Pat. At the end of the day, you need somebody to tell you why it won't work in order that you can then go and fix that issue. And definitely, as you do your pitch, and it might be that you're talking to people in your network to find out if they think it's a good idea. Not will they buy it, but will this be a good idea? And then you might find that your expectation is to sell apples, but it ends up being bananas, and that's fine. Don't be too caught up on having exactly what your thought was at the outset be what you end up providing to the client. And I would say there's a lot of services out there, and most people, when they start up a new business, it is in the service. I have not started up a product business, and I'm sure that's very different. So my guidance here is more towards the service side than it is the product side.
So based on that, someone listening right now that owns a business, maybe they're struggling a little bit. You've been coaching and consulting those people that may be struggling in their roles or in their business. What advice would you give them?
Well, first I would say is be candid with yourself. And I've used the word candid twice now. So many companies that I chat with and consult with, I guess, rather than chat, although I do think it's like a chat. So many companies that I consult with have issues that they don't really want to address, or they're being blind to them because they're so positive about what they have. And so I think, even inside a company, when I'm consulting with a company with 2 or 3 different people at the same time, our ideas might be similar, but they're not exactly in line. And so I think to be truthful to ourselves, be totally candid, and then address the real issues as opposed to some fabricated issue that you think it might be or that you would wish it be, and try and resolve that.
That must be challenging though to really get to the root of the problem, because I think sometimes as business owners we're so we're our greatest asset and sometimes our greatest liability. Because I find sometimes we have blinders on. Someone from the outside almost has to come in and say, "Hey, this is wrong," because
Yes.
you've convinced yourself it's right. It's the way you've always done it. It worked, 5 years ago. Now it's not working. Well, it's just a question of time. Well, maybe it's time to change that idea completely.
Yes, that's an interesting one. Having somebody from the outside give a different perspective. And when I work with companies, I would always classify my service as support, insofar as the people that I'm working with, they're just as bright, just as clever as I am. It's not like I'm bringing any secret sauce to the show. However, by having somebody outside give a different perspective, it can raise some interesting questions for the business leaders. And so I think often we kind of get stuck in our own problems because we're comfortable with the problems, or we're looking too closely at the issue. And having somebody from the outside look at it, they might see something completely different that would never have come to mind had it not been for that outsider. And then, of course, there's a bit of courage that the leaders need to take, is to recognize, yes, you're right. This is something I need to look at, and to actually do something rather than feel they own all the answers. So people who are willing to learn from others, typically they're the ones that get through the problems easier, I think.
Is that a barrier for you when you go into an organization where the person you're dealing with really doesn't, maybe you were hired by their boss and, sees you not as a threat, but almost as if, is that ever an issue for you?
It isn't, because maybe, Pat, because when I'm discussing the engagement before I've actually joined, before we've signed on an engagement, we make it real clear together that this is, a teamwork here. And this isn't me. I'm not advising them what to do, although sometimes it works out that way. But my goal is to support what they are doing. And I'm really there to give them an outside opinion. And of course, I've had experience in business, but there's so many different scenarios. None of us have been through all the scenarios. So it doesn't matter how experienced a leader is. And I've worked with some leaders that are far more experienced than I am, providing we are, I guess, we're going in with the right intent, which is to support each other, then there isn't an issue. So the answer is no, I don't see that as a barrier myself. I suspect if I sense that there was a barrier, that a person didn't want a coach, then I'd end the engagement, because I don't want to, bash my head against the wall.
The reason why I brought that up is, my background is, it was before starting Extension Marketing was in the sports world, and part of that was doing consultancy work for other sports teams. So yes. I was hired by the owners of those teams, but they weren't there when I went to their cities and met with their staff. And so I found initially there was staff were very, they had walls built up. Yeah. They thought I was going to be there to judge them. And it took me a long time in those engagements to get them to lower their guard a little bit and to understand, hey, I'm here for your betterment. I'm not here to try to, to take your job away or anything like that. So I was just curious if that was consistent with what you've done as well. But it sounds like you set the table properly from the beginning, and that's why it wasn't an issue for you.
And I think setting the table, from the beginning is important. I will also add, I do this sincerely. My intent is to get to know people whatever level they're at in the organization on a one-to-one basis. And so through that connection, I hope I put across the fact that I'm not here to judge anyone. I fully understand that there's different outcomes from different experiences, but it's not a judgment. And so what I'm trying to bring is a perspective. And then if the client wishes to use it, that's entirely up to them. But obviously, I hope they do, because that's why they engage me.
Gotcha. David, thanks so much for doing this. Where can our listeners find out more about you and your services?
Well, I will do a quick plug for my book, which is Jump, Splash, Swim. I launched this at the end of last year, and that talks about the program, the leadership onboarding program that I created. My company name is Kingscroft Consulting, so they can connect with me, David at kingscroftconsulting.com, or of course I'm on LinkedIn. So there's lots of different ways I think that we can all connect. And I tell you, if your marketplace, Pat, is mostly Ottawa, if that's true, there's a lot of people listening to this that I'm sure I already know them or they already know me. So it's a very small world, and it's always nice to reconnect with people that perhaps you haven't spoken to for a while.
It's great, David. Thanks so much for your time. Appreciate you doing this today.
Thank you, Pat. Much appreciated. And hopefully we'll see each other again soon.
If your company or organization is looking to improve your marketing, go to the Extension Marketing website at extensionmarketing.com and book a discovery call today.